Powerless by Lauren Roberts has been the talk of TikTok. It came out in 2023 and it just gained this massive following. It was super hyped up and everyone just fell in love with the story of Powerless. I feel like Powerless was the book that brought in a new wave of fantasy readers, or even just readers in general, because of how big it was on TikTok. It started off by Lauren Roberts being a TikToker and talking about this book, talking about the writing progress, and she eventually self-published and then became so popular that it got picked up by a publishing house and it became a worldwide phenomenon. So I started reading Powerless at the beginning of February. I went in with an open mind. I was like, I'm really going to enjoy this. It will probably be a popcorn book, a potato chip book. A book that I can just enjoy and fall in love with.
You'll never find.
But when I started reading it, and a few days passed and I was still reading it, and then a few more days passed and I was still reading it, and then 2 weeks had passed and I had to listen to the audiobook to help me finish the book, I felt like it was a missed opportunity and I was really disappointed with what it ended up being, and I can't bring myself to read the rest. The idea of reading a novella, the second book, and then the third book that's coming out in April is too much. Like, I spent over 2 weeks reading the first book when I'd been seeing people that I follow finish the first book in a couple days because they were so in love with the story. I wish I was one of them, but I quickly realised that this book just wasn't living up to the expectations that everyone else had set. I should probably introduce myself. I'm Pandora's Books. I make videos about reading, about books I love, books I don't love, and unfortunately this is just one of them. And I just wanted to rant basically about the Powerless series, or specifically just the first book, and how I just feel like it missed the mark. I feel like if it had just gone through some more editing or more of a foundation built before the actual writing process started, I feel like it could have had a lot more potential. Now, the Powerless series has been described as if Red Queen and the Hunger Games had a baby, and I just felt like it could have led itself more into a unique storyline rather than what it went with. If you really like the book, I'm very happy for you, but my views will not align with your views. So yeah, you have been warned. So firstly, I want to talk about the world, or the world building, I should say. There is none. There were many questions that I started asking myself, and then I never got the answers to them. I never really figured out how this world works, how the structure works, or the hierarchy and society as a whole. It just didn't feel complete. It didn't feel like much thought was put into it past some people have powers and some people don't. But from my understanding, this is what the world is. There is a kingdom called Ilia, where decades prior, this genetic mutation crossed the kingdom and people developed powers from this genetic mutation. However, some people didn't, and they became ordinaries, so people without powers. Nerd! And the other people who developed powers, they were either elites or defensives or mundanes. And there was also another category called fatals. And so these people who had powers, they were seen as better than the ordinaries. One thing to note, mundane means ordinary, so I don't know why they're called mundane, but mundanes do have powers, they just have weaker powers. Defensives, which kind of gets forgotten, like it's mentioned like once or twice in the book, but I feel like they're also elites, so I'm just going to call them elites from now on. They're people with better powers, I guess. And then you have the fatals, who are people who have really strong powers, like mind reading or a silencer is a fatal, which is someone who can dampen or take away someone else's power. So you have these 4 categories: fatals at the top, then elites, then mundanes, then ordinaries. 30 years prior to this book taking place, the new king took the throne, and he said that ordinaries were diseased. They were taking away the elite's powers.
They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there.
And when I say elites, I just mean everyone with powers. And so he started a purging where he basically sent out Imperials, which are like the kingdom's guards, to kill anyone who was ordinary. And if they found someone with powers who was helping an ordinary, they would be banished from the kingdom. They would have to go to the Scorches, which is this desert that they have to cross to get to other kingdoms, but they would most likely wouldn't survive. So that is basically the world. That is all you really get from the world. How it's determined, what type of person you are with powers, meaning are you a mundane, are you an elite, are you a fatal? It doesn't really explain. So the types of powers that we come across are, and I've got a list here: an amplifier, someone who can amplify someone's voice; a blazer, someone who can control fire; a blink, someone who can teleport; a bluff, someone who can detect lies. As you can tell, the names aren't very creative, so you can guess what people's powers are very easily. And the thing is, it's never explained in the book what makes someone a mundane and what makes someone an elite and what makes someone a fatal. It's just you're told, oh, this person's an elite and he has this power. There were some that overlapped. So a brawny, someone who is really strong. We came across multiple brawnies in the book. And a healer, there was multiple healers mentioned. However, one of our main characters, Kai, he has the power to essentially copy someone else's power within a certain radius that he is in. And as far as I'm aware, he is the only person that has this power. There was a cloner, and that was the only person we met who had a cloning ability. There was a duel, and they were the only person that had both fire and water ability. So it's a question of, are there certain powers that are more common? Are there more rare powers? Is the powers unlimited? Do we know all the powers? Are there still powers that are to be discovered? The way that these powers work and how many people have a certain power is never really explained. For example, Payton, who pretends to have a power, she pretends to be psychic. And most of the people she comes in contact with say, oh, I didn't even know that that was an ability, and so she has to prove it. So it's like, how do we know what could be a power, what not could be a power? How common is a power? How rare is a power? Are we still discovering powers? It's just, that's not really like explained and tapped into. Aside from the powers, we also have the kingdom and we have the castle. So we have the king who has 2 sons, one that's going to follow the footsteps and become king as well, and one who's going to be the future enforcer. What is an enforcer? Executioner, head of army, advisor, king's right-hand man. A lot of roles in one is what I'm getting from the minimal description we were given. He's always described as the future enforcer, but we never see a current enforcer. So yeah, there's very surface level explanation as to how this world works. 30 years ago, the king said that the ordinaries were diseased and a purging happened, so ordinaries were killed mass. So the purging happened 30 years ago. Present day, we have the purging trials, which is a yearly competition where elites are enrolled, are entered, are nominated. I'm not sure what the process in picking the people is, but they will then compete in 3 trials and there will be a winner at the end. The trials are a bit confusing. They're called the purging trials. When the book takes place, it is during the 6th purging trial, but the purging trials happen yearly. So what happened 5 years ago for them to decide to start these trials, I don't know. From my understanding, the reason the trials happen is to show off how powerful elites could be, and that's why we need to get rid of ordinaries. It's not fully explained, and I don't understand personally why the trials take place. They also enroll like the best fighters, I guess, the best of the elites to compete in these trials.
Are you not entertained? Are you not entertained?
But why would you put your best fighters into essentially a killing match? I'm not fully sure. And for what reason? For entertainment? I feel like that isn't a good enough reason for you to put your best fighters and possibly, you know, have them killed just for the entertainment of this society that we never really see. We're always told about the audience, but we never know about their views on the trial or just the view of the regular old people. We know there's a crowd and that they clap and that they cheer and that's it. During this book, the 6th year of trials is taking place. And I think that's really it. That's all the world building we get in this book. While I was reading this book, I was coming up with questions as to how this world works. And I was disappointed that I couldn't delve deeper into how this society, how this community runs. Another thing is that we see the palace and then we see the slums, which is the poorer areas of the kingdom where the mundanes mostly live. That's where Payden lives, our main character. We see no in-between. In my mind, how it worked was you have the palace here, there is like a desert of nothing and then like a dirt road and then suddenly you're in the slums. I don't even really remember how the slums look. It's described as cobblestone and like an alley and I don't know how big the slums are. It's crowded, that's all I've got. I imagine it one long like high street. I also don't know how the palace looks, that's not really described. Also in the book, when Payden gets picked up from the slums to be taken to the palace, she's taken in a carriage and they have a journey from the slums to the palace. Later on in the book, she then walks from the palace back to the slums and she goes during the night and then comes back within the same night and still manages to sleep. So I'm like, how far away is the slums from the palace that you managed to walk there and back, and daylight hasn't broken yet. They also have underground tunnels later on in the book where they manage to walk from the palace to the slums. So really, in my head, the slums is like a 10-minute walk from the palace. I feel like that isn't right. I think the author is relying on your connotations of the slums or your connotations of what a palace looks like to fill in the gaps for yourself. So I've got an image of a palace and I imagine that someone else would have a different image of the palace. And because there is no building or description, we are both technically right. So moving on, the characters. But the book has 2 points of view. So we have our main female character, Payden Gray, who is an ordinary who lives in the slums called Loot. She has to pretend that she has a power. So her dad trained her to pick up on like little tells from people so she could say that she's psychic. And so she's basically like the mentalist and or like Sherlock Holmes, and she is constantly looking at rings. She's constantly like, oh, someone has a tan line so they used to wear a ring and therefore they are no longer married or they've left their wife, but they're wearing it on their other hand and therefore they still love them, and oh, someone's got a ring around their neck so they've lost someone close to them recently, and oh, someone's got a ring in their pocket so they're proposing. It's always to do with rings is how her psychic ability works, and I just think the author couldn't think of another scenario where Payden could pick up on some secret from someone. So yeah, she is an ordinary. She lives on the streets. She has a best friend called Adina, who she ran into not long after she became homeless. And Adina is the only one that knows that she is an ordinary. Adina is a mundane. She is a seamstress. I guess that means that she can make clothes really well. It's not really explained. We just know that she likes to make clothes and her power has something to do with making clothes. They live in Loot. They are homeless, and that is because Payden's dad was murdered when she was, I think, 12, and then she leaves the house and never goes back to her house. She doesn't question why her dad was murdered. She just accepts it and lives on the streets and pretends to be psychic. She is You Are Not Like Other Girls. She has silver hair. She is agile and can fight really well and snarky and just a pick-me girl, if you will. On the other hand, we have our male main character. Kai Asa is the future enforcer that I mentioned earlier. Kai has the power of taking other people's powers or copying other people's powers that are within a certain radius. So if he's standing next to a blazer, he will also be able to use that power. He fights, he does a lot of training. He is the person that goes out on missions and kills loads of people. He is described as a monster. He is constantly shirtless. He smirks a lot. He has witty banter. He has loads of calluses. He also has loads of calluses. And he also has loads of calluses. Just in case you didn't get the idea, he has loads of calluses. Oh, and he also has dimples. And then we have Kit, who is Kai's brother. Kit and Kai are technically half brothers. Kit is going to be the future king. Kit's power is a dual, so he can control both water and fire. What is Kit's personality? He has eyes like his father. He is kind. He's not allowed to go outside. And then we have the other contestants. One of the first secondary characters that we get introduced to is Blair. She is the mean girl. She is the girl that you're supposed to hate because she also has a crush on Kai/Kit or just wants their attention.
Boo, you whore.
I don't really know if there's much more to her. She is an elite. Her power is a telly, meaning she can move things with her mind. She relies more on her power than her actual strength. And apparently she's the daughter of a general. Then we have Sadie, who I think is Blair's friend. She has the power of cloning herself. I don't really know what her personality was really. I think she again grew up in the palace, so she's friends with the princes. I think she's blonde. Then we have Jax, who is like an adoptive brother of the princes. Not actually adopted. I think the princes are the only ones that see him like a brother. And you're very much told that they care for him, but you're not really shown that they care for him. But yeah, he was taken in under their wing. And he is a blink, so he can blink. He's kind of like childlike. He's the youngest of all the contestants. He's 15. That's another thing. Like, they don't describe if like there's an age limit, if there's rules to entering the trials. Yeah, he's 15 and he's allowed in the trials, so I assume there's no age limit. He seems like the bubbly character, the very like childlike wonder, hasn't really seen the real world yet. At least that's what I got from him. But yeah, that's Jax. Then we have Andy, who is a cousin of the princes. Her dad is a handy. And she helps her dad, so she's Handy Andy. She can transform into an animal. Later on in the book, we find out that apparently if she stays in her animal form for too long, then she forgets about being human and she becomes the animal instead. She loses herself. That only comes up in the very last trial. It is never mentioned earlier. She's said to have spent a lot of time in animal form in the previous trial, so I don't really know what happened there. But Andy is nice. She's a nice girl because she is related to the princes and she can't, have a romantic relationship with them. It seems like she's really close to Jax, and yeah, that's her. She's nice. Then we have Braxton Hale, who is a brawny, which means he's really strong. He is also someone who lived in the palace. That's all I know of him. He's strong. Then we are left with the people that didn't grow up in the palace and that aren't elites. So we have Ace, who is an illusionist. And to be honest, I feel like for an illusionist, that should be an elite power, but apparently he's mundane. And he is kind of the villain of the book, or one of the villains. He is just evil, and there's no explanation as to why. There's no explanation as to why he hates our main characters. He's just cruel for no reason, and he can create illusions. Ace is also from the slums. They take the same carriage ride to the palace with Payden and the last contestant, who is Hera, and her power is she can turn invisible. In all honesty, I think the author forgot about her halfway through the book.
Where the hell have you been, Jeffrey?
I sure as hell want to tell you everything, but I ain't got a whole lot to go on.
If she died off page, I don't remember it. I honestly, I feel like the author just stopped mentioning her, like 50%, 40% into the book, so I can't tell you much. She's a small girl, and she can turn invisible, and she gets forgotten about. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe it's written that she dies, but I don't remember that. That is everyone. We have the king, who is cruel. He is the other villain of the story, and then we have the queen, and their characteristics are... King essentially wants an elitist society. He creates a mass purging, and it's kind of hinted at, or it's confirmed that like he lies about the ordinaries being diseased. He has cruel green eyes, and the queen is the only one that can make him smile, genuinely smile. That fact is mentioned multiple times. It is picked up on multiple times, as if it's the first time we're hearing that information, that he only gives a real smile when the queen is there. The queen is Kai's mother. That's all I know about her. Oh, and she likes green, and she likes the balls. As in, like, the dancers. Those are the characters. Moving on to the plot. For a fantasy book, the pacing was super slow. The only times where it picked up was during the trials, but even then, it was a fleeting moment. One of the reasons why I feel like it's so slow is because we like to go back in time and repeat the same events just from a different point of view until we catch up with the cliffhanger of the previous chapter. I don't know why we do it so much. We don't need to do it, but it happens. So we open with Payden, who is in a chimney, and she is looking for someone to rob. She always robs someone the exact same way every single time, and that's by stumbling into them. She also runs into an Imperial, who is the justice system in this world. They ask her what her power is. She says it's a psychic. He says prove it, and she notices that he has a faded tan line of a ring on his hand, but he's moved the ring to the other hand, and basically says, oh, you cheated on your wife, but you still love her, she's right. And so he slaps her and then lets her go. Then we meet Adina, who is her friend, who is the seamstress. We are then introduced to Kai, who has been sent on a mission by the king, who has said that there is an ordinary in the slums. Since Kai can use other people's abilities, he can also sense other people's abilities, and so it's easier for him to sense when someone's ordinary because he can't sense a power. So he goes into this house, he can tell everyone has a power in there, but something feels off. It's a family of 4, but there's 5 bowls on the side, rookie mistake. So then he finds out that they're hoarding a little girl that they've adopted. She's like 8 and she's ordinary. So he banishes the family to the Scorches because they've helped an ordinary, and he takes the little girl out back. What he's supposed to do is kill her, but he doesn't kill children because he's nice, even though he kills everyone else. And so instead he takes the 8-year-old to the Scorches, where she will die with the family. Really, he's damning her to a more painful death. Like, it would have been easier if she had died by sword in like 2 seconds, but instead he's damning her to die of starvation and dehydration and in the scorching sun, and that sounds worse. And so he continues walking down the slums in loot. Payden spots him, and he's got a nice pouch of shillings, silver, whatever it is, and she decides to rob him. She stumbles into him. They have banter back and forth where they're essentially flirting with each other. This book is described as enemies to lovers. It is instant attraction, but they just have witty banter, so really they're enemies. She then steals the money off of him and leaves. Now, we saw the lead up to the money stealing twice. We saw it from Payton's point of view, and then we saw it from Kai's point of view, which significantly slows the pacing down. Kai continues on his way, but then he gets cornered by some people in an alleyway. They start beating him up, and it turns out they have a silencer with them. Kai is powerless. Haha. He feels like he's about to die, but guess what? Hayden comes back. She saves the day because the silencer obviously can't dampen her powers. She fights him and saves Kai. And then she realizes who Kai is, that he is the prince and someone that would kill her if he knew what she was. So she's done a little whoopsie there. Now Kai is saved and he takes the silencer as his own prisoner to then torture later on. And Payton is like, ooh, and kind of runs away after some banter, of course. Kai goes back to the palace, does some torturing of the silencer. He doesn't give any information. I think he gives his name, but nothing more. We are introduced to Kit, who is Kai's half-brother, who is the future king. They have a little sparring match. They're doing training. We're introduced to the other people who will later be contestants because all the contestants live in the palace. And again, makes no sense why you would have all your up-and-coming warriors compete in a killing match later on, but whatever. This is where Blair and Sadie tell Kai that they have made it to the trials. I don't know if that means that you enter yourself into the trials and you have to, I don't know, fill in a form, or it's a lucky pot and they pick out a name of a hat. I don't know, like, is there a judging process? Or are people nominated? Either way, they have made it to the trials, and so has Jax, the prince's adopted brother, who seems to be too young to be in the trials, but he is, and he's really happy to be in the trials. Then we go to Payton's point of view, who people are looking at her, you know, people notice her now because she saved the prince earlier. She's been dubbed as the Silver Savior because she's got silver hair, and they're looking at her. She's walking down the street, which isn't helpful because she's a thief who likes to not be noticed. But it turns out they're looking at her because the names for the trials have been announced. And right at the bottom of the list is her name. Because apparently every year there is a mundane that they, again, is it nominating? Is it entering? Do only the elites enter and then they just pick a mundane against their will? Either way, there's always a mundane or a couple mundanes that are entered into the trials, basically for entertainment value because they die first. She's entered into the trials and the Imperials are there straight away to take her. Graciously, they let her say her goodbyes to Adina. She promises to not forget her. Spoiler alert, she does. Obviously, they're both worried because she doesn't actually have powers and she's about to go into a fighting competition with people who do have powers, so that's a bit worrisome. But don't worry, her dad, before he died, trained her well. Trained her how to use a dagger, and boy does she know how to use that dagger, especially when it's to someone's throat, because she is constantly putting a dagger to someone's throat. Mostly Kai's, because that's flirting. So she gets in the carriage along with Callum, who is the illusionist, and Hera, who is the forgotten invisible girl, and they travel from Loot to the kingdom in a carriage. It must just be like a 2-second journey because, like I said, it's only a 10-minute walk from the palace. So yes, they go to the kingdom, they go to the palace, contestants each have their room, and for some reason, the king likes to keep the contestants locked in their room for 2 days, and that's it. I don't know if they get food, I don't know if, you know, she says that she hated it, and that she just paces around. I'm like, did you not have a bed? Did you not have a bath? Because the moment she's told that she can leave, she has a bath as her first thing. I'm like, you had 2 days to do that. Like, what are you going on about? The king likes to keep them locked in their room for 2 days for some reason. And each contestant has their own imperial assigned to them. So her imperial is called Lenny. Anyway, so she has to go to a dinner with the other contestants. That's where she meets everyone else, and she sees Kai and they have banter again. She makes a comment about how wasteful the food is because back home in the slums people would kill to have this much food and the royals are just wasting it. But really Kai is the one that picks up that that is what she's thinking. I don't know how he managed to pick that up so quickly. The queen at the dinner announces that everyone needs to partner up for the ball because there's an odd number of them. Don't worry, the odd one out will have a partner. Essentially, it means that Payden can partner with Kit, the king, and that's the only reason that that is brought up. Kai gets partnered with Blair, Payden gets partnered with Kit. Leading up to the ball, Payden doesn't know how to dance, so Kit whisks her away in the middle of the night, multiple nights in the week, I assume, to teach her how to dance in his room, where, by the way, the bedposts have sword slashes in them because Kai has been tortured by his dad, and he goes all emo out on the bedposts with a sword.
Some of you may recognize me from my emo a cappella group, Self Harmony.
This is where Payden remembers, oh my god, I have my friend Adina, who I said I would never forget, but she did forget. Drastically forgotten. So she brings Adina to the palace to be her seamstress, who will make her dresses for the ball, and that will be her only purpose for this story. All between this, there's training, and by training I mean Kai and Payden having banter, where then Payden holds a dagger to his throat, and he braids her hair for some reason, and they just fight. Leading up to the ball, it is an unspoken rule that all the girls must wear green because that is the queen's favourite colour and it is the colour of the kingdom. But Payden goes, no, I am not like other girls. Adina, you will make me a dress the colour of silver to remind everyone that I am the silver saviour. She wants to stick in people's minds because one thing I've forgotten about the trials is that the audience has a voting system. I don't know how you win the trials. She wants to be in the audience's good books so that they vote for her, but there's never mention of a leaderboard, and there's never mention of points, and there's never mention of ranking, so I don't really know how that works either. If they vote for her, they don't even do it, like they don't give her anything. I don't know, it's confusing. Kai finds her like super attractive, and his partner Blair is pissed off because he's not paying attention to her because Payden's just so beautiful. But they're still enemies, remember, because they're not lovers yet. Anyway, so they have this first ball, there's dancing, they go back to their rooms, they go to sleep, and then they wake up in the woods called the Whispers. So they have been drugged and deposited in the woodlands. It's from Kai's point of view. He wakes up and sees a sight, I think they were called. People that can record with their eyeballs and then later on project it. So essentially they're like cameras. He has a note in his pocket which explains what the first trial is. Basically, each contestant has a band around their arm. They have to be in the woods for 6 days or 7 days. They have to cut the bands off of each other's arm, and the person with the most bands by the end wins. For it being a trial, it's pretty boring because Kai wakes up, he goes to a little river, he makes camp, he doesn't buy a rabbit. He catches a rabbit and cooks it. Braxton comes across him. Braxton is a brawny who, has super strength or whatnot. They fight. Kai gets burned over the fire. He then returns the burn to Braxton, and then he cuts Braxton's band off. And Braxton sulks off. Then we go to Payden's point of view. She gets a bow and arrow because there's like things scattered in the woods to help the contestants. So she really goes Katniss Everdeen with a bow and arrow. She is looking for water. Callum comes across her. Callum casts illusions of her young self who looks sick, and then he injures her drastically. She then finally comes across the same body of water that Kai is at. They have a bit of banter, but he knows that something's wrong because she's just telling him to go away because she wants water, and she faints because she's lost so much blood. He heals her, and then we have the classic, "Who did this to you?" This book is just trope after trope after trope. It's a way of getting from one trope to the next trope to the next trope, but I digress. He heals her. He goes, "Who did this to you?" she then sees the burns on him and spins it around on him. Who did that to you? And then they're just chilling. And then Sadie comes along. This is the girl that can make clones of herself. She wants to get their bands, obviously, because that is the point of this trial, if you had forgotten. They have a fight. It's a decent fight, but eventually what happens is Kai kills Sadie to save Hayden, because they've kind of agreed to have this alliance. Kai then goes to bury Sadie because he is not the monster that she thought he was. He wants to give her a proper burial. And then they dance in the woods together, and a sight sees it. They just chill for a bit again with loads of banter, of course. And then it's coming to the end of the week, so they're trying to get to the edge. They have to get to the edge of the woods. They run into Andy and Jax, who seem to have made an alliance together, but they don't fight each other. So now both Hayden has an extra band because she's got Sadie's band, and Kai has an extra band because he has Braxton's band. Braxton has no bands, I think. Sadie is dead.
Bad news.
What?
The Dacia Sandero. It's delayed.
Oh no. Anyway, last week.
Hera, I think she's forgotten by this point. And yeah, so then we get to the edge of the woods where we see the audience, and then they have to fight each other. This is where Callum, the illusionist from earlier, then casts illusions with Kai. They have an interesting fight. This is where things picked up again because there was some actual action. He casts this illusion where Kai thinks he's about to kill Callum, but instead he puts a throwing star into Jax, his adopted brother's chest. And so then he panics, and eventually he manages to save Jax because he runs close enough to the audience where he's in the radius of a healer and then uses their power to heal him. I don't think there was a winner announced for this who had the most bands. I think there was a leaderboard that was mentioned once, but never again. Who ended up with the most bands? Not sure. If there was a draw, I don't know what happens with that, but that's the end of the first trial. One thing I should mention is this year's trial is different from all the other year's trials. Different how I have no clue. We never know what the previous year's trials looked like because I don't think the author knew what the previous years looked like. So all we know is that it's different from previous years. So far what we've learned of it being different is that it doesn't take place in the bowl arena, which is this arena close to the palace. It is instead taking place outside of the bowl, and that's why the sites then project it for the audience to watch later on. And it's different this year because Kai is in the trials, because he is the future enforcer and he needs to prove himself and he needs to win the trials. If he doesn't win the trials, I don't know what happens. I don't think anyone knows what happens if he doesn't win the trials. Spoiler alert, he doesn't. Actually, who wins the trials? I can't remember now. But I don't think he wins. We don't know what the consequences of that is. And if the trials have only happened for 6 years, and I don't know there is no current enforcer, so it's not a thing that all enforcers have to go through the trials. And why would you put your enforcer in the trials when he could get killed? I don't know. It's stupid. There is no thought process behind it, so does it really matter? I guess not. Anyway, so after these first trials is completed, we go back to, the training and the more banter. So we have our second ball where, again, Hayden wears a different coloured dress than everyone else because she wants to stick out because she's not like other girls. At this ball, she develops claustrophobia because she wears a corset that is too tight, and then she has a panic attack for the first time that's never established beforehand. Kai... Oh, I just remembered something. There were interviews. It doesn't matter. Anyway, back to the second ball because we need more than one. And there's more dancing. And Kai loosens her corset when she has a panic attack. And so there's like banter about him undressing her and whatnot, but he helped her, so it's fine. He tells her, go back to your room, you're not feeling well. And when she goes back to her room, then there's just this impromptu fight. It's not a trial, but they want all the contestants to fight, so an Imperial has to go get Hayden back from her room so that they can fight. She has to fight Blair. She loses, but she manages to embarrass her. Sorry, my camera died. I should also mention that the king doesn't like Payton. It's very clear that he expected her to die, she didn't, and then she's a girl from the slums and she's seen making alliances with his son, the future enforcer. They're caught dancing in the woods. He's very much like, stay in your lane, you're gonna die. She doesn't do that. She continues on her way, falling for both of the princes. It's more obvious that she's for Kai, but she creates a relationship with both of them. Anyway, at this ball, I think it's this ball, an attack happens from the resistance. There's always got to be a resistance in a world like this. And they attack, but it seems like they weren't prepared. Payton is scurried off, so is Kit. He's not allowed to fight because he's the future king. And Kai, fights as the future enforcer. After this, it's the second trial. The second trial, they wake up at the bottom of a mountain. They are not alone this time. They have been split into two groups. So Kai is with Blair, Braxton, and Andy. Payton is with Jax and Callum. And this is why I say Hera was forgotten. Maybe she died in the first trial. I'm not completely sure. But they don't mention her ever again. And so the task is they have to work together to reach the top of the mountain. There's some grumbling, there's some, disagreements. Kai and his team seem to make it up with no issues really, aside from Blair being bitchy. And then Payton's team, Callum causes some illusions and Payton nearly falls down the mountain because he is the villain for no reason.
His voice is even more boring than usual, isn't
it? Yeah.
Fuck me.
And once they reach the top of the mountain, both teams get to the top at roughly the same time. They now have to turn on each other and capture a flag at the top of some pole. First one to get it wins. And so they all start fighting each other. Payton starts fighting Callum. She basically overpowers him eventually. He tries to do the same illusions that he did last time on her, but she's like, you can't use that against me. I'm used to it now, whatnot. And she's about to kill him when she sees Kai out of the corner of her eyes and she's like, he is not mine to kill. And she leaves Kai to kill him because he nearly made him kill Jax. Kai kills Callum. Callum is now out of the game. Payton is left to go get the flag. Braxton also dies. So now we've just got Kai, Payton, Blair, Andy, and Jax left in the running. Payton wins that trial because she gets the flag, and that's the end of that. We go back to training, we go back to more boring banter and talking in between the trials. Payton finally decides to go back to her home where the resistance meet up, and she meets the resistance and she joins them with relatively no questions as to what their plans are, aside from they plan to get into the bowl arena and make a stand, make an announcement that they want to be treated as normal. I don't know how they thought that would work, because the reason they're not treated as normal is because they're viewed as diseased. And so by them just saying we want to be treated as normal wouldn't change anything, because their disease is that they weaken the elite's powers. What they needed to do was prove that they're not diseased, they don't weaken their powers, and to make the kingdom realize that the king had been lying to them. But they don't do that. But basically there's tunnels under the castle, and they ask Payton to find the tunnels that lead into the bowl arena. And it turns out Lenny, Payton's Imperial Guard, he is part of the resistance. So she is now being tasked to find a way into the tunnels. She has to get closer to Kit. That is her next goal. So in between these trials, she's getting closer to him. She keeps mentioning to him, oh, you need to learn who your people are. You need to see what it is like to live in loot. And he's like, I can't leave the castle, I'm not really allowed. But eventually she manages to convince him, and he takes her through the tunnels, and it turns out the tunnel entrance can only be accessed by a key that he holds, and apparently only he holds. So eventually she does like her normal thieving self. She trips and she takes the key from him and she gives it to the resistance members. We are also now left with the final ball and then leading to the final trial. At the final ball, she again doesn't wear green. She wears black, I think it is, to stand out. Kai is drunk. He just is so in love with her and so upset that he can't be with her. Kai and Paden kiss at this ball. They go outside and they have a moment and they kiss. That's all that you need to know for that ball. I don't know why there needed to be a ball before every single trial. I don't think it was necessary. It very much felt like a rinse repeat. By having ball, trial, it didn't give enough. Either way, we get to the final trial, and that is finally in the ball arena, which is like the previous trials because all the other trials previously took place in the arena. And this time it's a maze. It gives Goblet of Fire, Harry Potter vibes. It's a maze where blooms, their power to manipulate plants, make a moving maze of hedges and flowers. And we see Paden and we see Kai. They're separated, and the task is they have to get to the middle of the maze. And once you get to the middle of the maze, there is a criminal there that they have to kill. The first person to kill the criminal in the middle of the maze wins. Do they win that trial? Do they win the whole trial? Do they, like, what if someone had won 2 out of 3 trials or got more points that we don't know about, but then someone else won it doesn't make sense. Because if you win the whole trials, the whole competition by killing the person and getting in the middle, then what was the point of the first 2 trials? I don't know. Either way, as we go through, we see Paden, she faces Blair. They have a little kerfuffle, and then she gets past. And then we see Kai face Andy. They have a little kerfuffle, and then they get past. And then they both get into the middle. And I'm like, so you're going to have them fight one person, and that is their only confrontation for this whole trial. For the big final event, that is it. They get to the middle. They all seem to get to the middle at the same time. The person in the middle, who's the criminal, who's deserving of death, is actually Adina, Paden's friend, who you may have forgotten about, that the author had forgotten about, and Paden had forgotten about. She is the person that needs to be killed. Obviously, Paden's not doing that, but Blair ends up killing her. So Blair wins the trial. Does she win the trials overall? I don't know. And Adina dies in Paden's arms, and she's so sad, and blah, blah, blah. And Adina asks her, please, there is a green vest that I made for you. Promise me you'll wear it. And Paden's like, I will wear it. I promise. Every day I will wear it. And I'm thinking, Adina must have hidden something in this vest. It must be of some importance. I don't think it is. I think it's just the last thing she made, so there's no point to that. Anyway, so that happens, and just before the trials can be completed and the winner is announced, the resistance attack. They have a silencer with them who restricts everyone's powers. They all restrain one of the contestants. They're too dumb to restrain Paden, so it's very obvious that Paden is working with them. And Kit also now knows that Paden is working with them because they've come through the tunnels, and he turns. This is his turning moment. He becomes the villain now because he was so very kind leading up to this point, and Paden's betrayed him, and now he's the bad guy. The resistance, they make an announcement. They want to be equal.
I've worked for you a long time, and I'm paid less than Robin. Equal pay for men and women.
No time for jokes, Batgirl.
However, they've already started kind of fighting, and they go against plan or against what Paden had thought they were going to do. I don't think they really thought through their whole process anyway. But of course, that doesn't work, and Kai has been training to copy the silencer's power. So he becomes free from the restriction, and a big fight comes out, and essentially, they kill the resistance, or they kill the majority, and some escape. Payton escapes, but now everyone knows that she's part of the resistance. She's running out of the arena. She manages to get out. She is about to leave the palace, but then she remembers, wait, Adina told me, I promised to her that I would wear the green vest that she made me. So she goes back into her room, she gets it, and as she's leaving, she runs into the king, who managed to escape the arena as well. They get into a kerfuffle. Turns out the king knew that she was an ordinary this whole time. How? Because he knew that her dad was part of the resistance. So therefore, she was automatically an ordinary in his eyes, even though her dad was an elite. And there's no explanation as to how genetically ordinaries are made. They have an argument back and forth. He attacks her. She's in self-defense. And then he brings up the fact of, yes, he knew what she was. And she's always been under the impression that he's killed, the king has killed her father. And he finally breaks the news of, it wasn't me who killed your father, even though 5 paragraphs before he says, yes, it was me who killed your father. He goes, no, it wasn't me who killed your father. It was Kai. He killed your father. He is the one that put a sword through him and killed him and left him for dead. And she's now shocked because throughout the whole book, she's talking about how she saw her father's killer's eyes, that they were the green eyes, that Kit's eyes always reminded her of the king's eyes. And that's why she struggled so much to have a relationship with him, because it reminded so much about her father's death, her father's murder. But it turns out it wasn't even the king. It wasn't Kit. The killer didn't have green eyes at all. Kai has grey eyes. The killer wasn't a grown man like the king, like she thought. No, the killer was a 15-year-old. So how she managed to mistake the two, I have no clue. But it turns out Kai is the person that killed her father. And then in self-defense with the king, they fight and she kills the king. She stabs her father's dagger through his heart and he dies. Just as she's leaving, Kai comes and sees that she has killed his dad. Obviously, he's very upset about this, even though his dad was a horrible person, and even though his dad tortured him, and even though his dad treated him poorly and never acted like a father. He's very upset that she's killed his dad in self-defense. So he has to go after her, but he gives her a head start because obviously he still has feelings for her. So he can't do it right this moment. And she runs off and we have an epilogue, and it is from Kit's perspective, who is now king. It has been 3 days since the original king has died. Kit has taken over. He calls in Kai, who is now officially the enforcer. The trials have been long forgotten. Is Blair the winner? We have no clue. What does she win? I don't know, bragging rights? Doesn't matter anymore because the king is dead and Kit is now king. And Kit tells Kai, my new enforcer, bring Payton Grey to me, enforcer. And that is how the book ends. I have obviously cut out all the times a dagger has been held to the throat. I've obviously cut out all the times Payton falls in love with Kai's dimples. Every time a callus was on someone's hand. Every time there was a smirk or some witty banter. I didn't need to cut out the enemies to lovers because there was no enemies to begin with. It was insta-love. It was a rinse repeat. It was just the same thing over and over again with many little differences between each ball and trial. The book just left me with what will be my final section of this video of what was the point. I feel like there could have been something more with this book. If it wasn't so surface level, if it wasn't so vague in its descriptions, if the world had been thought through better, if it had more depth to it, if we saw more than just a palace and the slums, if we knew what the rest of the kingdom looked like. What was your average person like? What was a common power? What was a rare power? I feel like by having so many powers, it kind of made it confusing. The hierarchy just needed more. And so it didn't feel like a real world. And the characters, I'll be very honest, any perspective from another guy, they all just seemed like another version of of Kai. Payden had no curiosity to anything. She was very passive. Like, her father was murdered in front of her. She never thinks to ask why. She comes across the resistance. She never thinks to go out looking for them until like 60%, 70% through the book. She never asks questions. She just takes information and then just moves on. There was no strong theme. There was no strong world, characters in this book. And so I'm kind of just left with nothing. So I do ask, like, what was the point of it? Because by the end of the book, it felt just a bit empty. If things were intertwined better, if things were built on a proper foundation, I think I would be more excited to read book 2. And unfortunately, I'm not. And I just wish that Lauren Roberts had put more emphasis on building a foundation for this world. You have to make everything believable, make characters feel like they're real characters. Like, I understand their motives, I understand why they're doing things. Don't make them evil just because you need a villain. I need to know why they do the things that they do. I'm just tired now after reading it, ranting about it. It was just disappointing. That is my review of Powerless by Lauren Roberts. It was not what I was expecting. It is what it is. If you enjoyed the book and there's a way that you could enlighten me as to why it was a good book, tell me in the comments. If there's things that I didn't mention, there's loads of things I didn't mention because all the details are slowly leaving my brain after reading this book. But if there's more things, silly things that I didn't mention, leave them down in the comments as well. And I shall see you next time, hopefully with a more positive review. Bye.